Hi, everyone. Welcome to the fifth episode of Mirror Moments. I'm Sheila Marmon, the founder and CEO of Mirror Digital. We're really excited to have you here today for an important, for Black History Month, but for Black every month. uh, we are talking about the evolution of the Black Lives Matter movement, how that movement started and where it has grown and where it is potentially going. So I have an amazing set of panelists here with us today. I have Julesy, I have Reggie Williams, and I have Charity Croft. I'm going to let all the panelists introduce themselves. We're really excited to have this slate of experts and really hope that you enjoy the conversation. So why don't I start off with Charity? Why don't you tell us a
Okay,
little bit
yeah.
about yourself?
My name is Charity Croft, and yeah, I am a rapper, public speaker, songwriter. I I believe deeply in the limitlessness of human potential, and I want to inspire as many people as possible to reach that limitlessness. I do that through helping people become better humans on a personal level, and also dismantling a lot of the ills of society that limit us from becoming the best type of person that we can become. And so, yeah, I think this conversation will be pretty on par with that. So, yeah.
And one thing that Charity is not telling you about himself is he has over 300 million views on YouTube. Is that right? Or on different platforms?
Yeah,
So
so cumulatively through the platforms, but yes,
cumulatively across
people
platforms. So
watch, people watch.
major creator, major impact. So Charity, welcome. So exciting to have you. And next up, we've got Julesy. Julesy, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Hi, I'm a digital content creator and I run a digital firm that works to counter misinformation that's prevalent in the Black digital landscape.
And one thing that I love about Julesy, she runs a company called Smart Brown Girl, which is fire if you haven't checked it out, and recently launched a book club in conjunction with that platform. So, Julesy, thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to the conversation today. And then, last but certainly not least, is Reg Williams.
Hi, I'm Reggie Williams. I'm the founder and CEO of Ambrosia for Heads. We are a hip hop media platform with a site, social media, and also a podcast. Ambrosia is Greek for food of the gods. So we pride ourselves on providing the finest food for thought, the finest food for hip hop heads. So highly curated, highly premium, and really designed to elevate.
Thank you so much, Reggie. So, welcome everyone out there in the interwebs. So, today we're going to talk a little bit about how Black Lives Matter has evolved and grown. We hear so many hashtags. We started out with Black Lives Matters. We now hear Say Her Name, Black Trans Lives Matters, All Black Lives Matter. Where did we start from with this movement and how have we evolved? Just to give you guys a little bit of background, the Black Lives Matter movement was founded in July 2013 after the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the murder of Trayvon Martin. There were three founders: Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi. And they came together to affirm the fact that even in a system that was not honoring Black life and Black people, that we do matter. And that movement has since caught crossfire. Not only is it nationwide, it's global. There are over 30 chapters in the United States, and they continue to grow and evolve. So I'm going to stop there and let our experts speak on how they think about Black Lives Matter. And that's actually our first question. What does Black Lives Matter mean to you? And please, anyone just, jump in and share.
I'll start. For me, it means exactly what it says. Our lives have just not been valued in the same way as those of other populations. And it's not to diminish or, speak against any other set, but, we've seen for centuries now that our lives can be taken at the hands of others without any kind of recourse. I think that Black Lives Matter really is emblematic of a new kind of activism that has started in social media, but quickly crossed over into the real world. We've seen that with other things like Oscar So White, Occupy Wall Street, Me Too. I think it's been an incredibly powerful movement. And while other movements have been kind of fleeting, this is one that has gained and resurged over time. We had the initial introduction back in 2013. I think it kind of reached what people thought was a zenith in 2016 with the murders of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. And then, this past summer, I think it reached far greater heights and took on an importance and a scope beyond what anyone could have imagined. And I think we're looking now to kind of couple that with the real world power and change that we think it can bring, and we're going to get into that in a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's grassroots. As much as we throw out words like a grassroots movement, I think Black Lives Matter is actually what real grassroots activism is, which is just like people. It feels like it belongs to everybody, and I think that is what's one of the most enchanting aspects about it. And I think it separates it a lot from the civil rights era. I think we could stand to learn a little bit from like the civil rights era of the 60s and even went a little bit into the 70s. But I think the biggest differentiation, and maybe for better or worse, is that this is a little less from a hierarchical standpoint, right? Back then you had Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Stokely Carmichael, and the list goes on of these people who are kind of heralded as this is the civil rights movement and the rest of us follow them. But this is just like, no, we all out here with our own agency, with our own power and our own urgency and demand of justice. So I think I think it might be the first ever fully grassroots essence of Blackness. And again, the definition that I'm giving grassroots, which is one that is completely of and for the people, and the ownership is very lateral. So yeah, that's how I look at Black Lives Matter. And one little thing that I would like to say, just in case there are any white people watching this or people who are just now interested in Black Lives Matter, there is an implied to after it. No, we are not saying we matter more than everybody and all of these things. We're saying that our lives are at stake and the focus should be on us specifically at the moment. Yes.
Yeah, for me, I think it's important to distinguish between, Black Lives Matter, the hashtag, and the utility of that and how useful it has been in the age of social media. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, you sound perfect.
Okay, sorry. And the difference of what like the organization has become. I think the utility of the hashtag is very powerful. I think it's a continuation of the long history. And when I say civil rights, I'm not just talking about the civil rights of the 50s and 60s, but I'm talking about the struggle to abolish slavery. And, since we've been in this country, that our fight for our rights within the Constitution of the United States. And it's a continuation of that. When I think of the organization, it's a little bit more complicated, but I also think, like part of we're imperfect people, and part of why I can even think about how the organization, I have complicated thoughts around it, is because of the progression that we've made in the, understanding social theory on a more general level, right? Of like opening up like the idea of like that I could even say that I know that us as Black people have lived under a racial contract, that we as Black people in America have lived under a stigmatizing shame that white people have never felt. And so I think that's why like the utility of the hashtag is very positive, because we've been able to have more of these conversations and really educate a broader audience. I think I just have different thoughts on the organization itself.
X.
Thank you. So from the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, the protests, you alluded to these a little bit, Reggie, that started in 2020 that really took fire in a way that we hadn't seen. How did you grapple with everything that was happening during that time and sort of like the reemergence of the Black Lives Matter movement and other, social justice movements? And what did you learn from these conversations? What do you think people should take away from the conversations that really not started then, but really took flight then in a broader way?
I was honestly enamored, and obviously not enamored by the death and the horrible murders of these people, but I was enamored by the fact that it was just like, oh, is the revolution happening? Let me get my clothes on because I'm ready. I'm here for it, right? And so I remember the day the protests got outside of my house, like directly outside, like the revolution pulled up on me. And at first I was nervous because I live in a community that is majority Black. And it's interesting how the media swings things, right? The media understanding of the protests in the initial phases of it were like, people are destroying things, right? And so even me, as a victim of that, of watching that media, my first thought was like, no, this is our neighborhood. We can't destroy this. So my first thought was honestly fear, because I thought that people were about to mess up this Black neighborhood. And it was just like, no, let's go fuck up their shit, you know? And I'm sorry, excuse my language, but you know, that's what I'm saying. If it's going to happen, let's not do it here. But then when I walked outside, I saw joy. I saw unity. I saw a bunch of Black people uniting together saying, we won't stand for it. And I believe deeply in the metamorphosis aspects of life, the idea that death and darkness are what brings us to light, right? Almost every great thing that has ever happened in the history of this world has happened through a certain level of revolution and a certain level of fearlessness towards change. And so I think that it was a necessary catalyst to reemerge that urgency within us. My fears moving forward is that we don't lose that. I don't want us to think that Joe Biden is the savior, or any liberal, moderate Democrat is the savior, you know, but that's another conversation. And I think that we were so thirsty to get Trump out of there that now we feel like we might be all good. And I feel like it's losing a little steam. I don't want that. I want to keep that urgency. So yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I proceeded with
How do some
caution.
of the other? Oh, go ahead, Reggie.
Yeah, I proceeded with caution. You know, we've seen the movie before where someone is killed, and often in an extremely brutal way by the police. I apologize, sorry about that. And then, you know, even when it is recorded on film, it is still not prosecuted. We've seen this happen time and time again. And so when someone first sent me the link to the George Floyd story, my response was almost kind of hardened, you know, especially after, you know, the last several years that we had endured. And people forget, but you know, he was killed on May 25th. That was Memorial Day. The story broke on Tuesday. It didn't really kind of get the national scope and coverage that became fever pitch until that Friday. And that was when the police stations were on fire. That is when it caught people's attention and people realized that something was different on this time. So when that happened, then I became sort of cautiously optimistic that we might actually be able to facilitate like lasting change through this. And I used that opportunity for those, you know, X amount of weeks to try and push through as many things as I could, really believing that it was going to be a finite opportunity and that the window would close. I also did so very cautiously by framing things not as doing it out of moral goodness or out of the goodness of their heart, but these are the right things to do from a capitalistic perspective, from a law and justice perspective, things like that. And I think that we've seen, you know, things have not died down completely, but they certainly are not at the same level they were this summer. And so this is always going to be something that I think we capitalize on those moments as they open for like big change. But in the meantime, we toil and work toward, you know, the change that is going to be long lasting on that grassroots level.
Yeah, you know, I'm always cautious about the idea of how I view Black Death as an event, because there obviously last year's protests led to some initiatives. I'm careful to say, did it really lead to like a change? I don't know. I think there was opportunity, especially for Black influencers across the spectrums of genres that we produce content, to make more money and have more opportunity. But I also don't know if the people that were in the streets protesting really benefited. I don't know that I'm never going to see another case of Ahmaud Arbery or George Floyd, you know, and what is really the difference is, oh, we have cameras now. These are things that have just been happening. And so I don't want to look at it as like the event, because like these things constantly happen. happen, and who gets to have like these small checks of privilege that allow their story to get told versus the other stories that are not being told about police brutality. And so when I'm not seeing change on a criminal justice side, when we go from, my own seeing Black politicians really decry, and I live in North Carolina, so I'm in Charlotte, which is borders South Carolina, and particularly South Carolina, Black politicians were very much so offended by this idea of defund the police. And so like what are we really doing with the people that are putting their lives and their bodies on the line when they're in the streets? Like what change are we really enacting? And so the agitation is there's always a positive to it, because there's like, it's pressing for change, and it's a very highly visible form of like pressing for change. My concern is, what are the people that are actually in power and control, what change are they actually investing in?
It's a great question. I almost want to dive into that. Well, so in thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement and how we affect change and moving it beyond a hashtag, we've seen several other hashtags emerge to represent voices that may have felt that they weren't necessarily represented in the Black Lives Matter movement overall. So Say Her Name, the Black Trans Lives Matter hashtag, and really looking to address issues of patriarchy, misogyny, our complicitness or silence in the face of death of Black trans people. So from your perspective, how do we better advocate for groups who may be facing further marginalization in one capacity or another based on their self-identity? How do we think about incorporating them into the broader conversation, or should there be a separate movement? What are your perspectives on that?
Well, how are we treating people in our real lives? I think that's the first step. How are you treating the people in your intimate social circle? We can talk all day about very high end social theory, right? But how am I putting that into praxis? So how am I treating my parents, my family? How am I treating my significant others? And for all of us on here that own digital platforms where we produce content, what content are we putting out, right? And what is the messaging that's featured in our content? So if we're going to counter misogyny, I'm not going to name no names, but there's a particular person that people find really funny who dunks on single Black mothers all day long. And then we'll repost it as a joke, or we'll repost it and say thoughts, and we're not critically engaging this content. We're not shifting the narrative. We're not doing anything radical. What we're doing is replicating harm, but then thinking that because we post a hashtag that we have somehow minimized harm. And I think also when we get into minimizing harm, that's not an easy task. Because when we look at how are we, as a Black woman, I am very capable of harming other Black women. And because I am a person who has lived through highly stigmatized shame, I think about being a Black woman in this world is like being born into, as Melissa Harris Perry would say, is being born into a crooked room and being told that the person is wrong, not the room is wrong. So you're constantly shifting yourself to fit into this room, but it's never going to fit correctly because the room is wrong. You're not wrong. So because of that, I'm also going to replicate harm as I try to shift for this crooked room onto other people that share the same identity as me. And so when that happens, what sort of restorative practices reparative practices have I put into place to hold myself accountable, to deal with forgiveness, and to actually, we'll say, oh, I love you all day long, but what are we actually doing to the labor of our love, right? And I've been in situations where people have offended me and I've offended others. And how do we actually have a framework to make sure that we can come out on the other side better and reduce the harm so those things don't happen again? So before we even get to these larger parts of society, what are we doing in our intimate spheres of influence?
Yeah, I also won't name the person that she was referring to, but when I saw videos of said person, I was pushing back feelings of hate. And I had to deal with that, even on a personal level, because it's just like, why does it bring that out? But it's because we as Black men got a lot of issues, bro. I did an educational video called "Are Straight Black Men the White People of Black People?" And we absolutely are, right? And again, it's like no one's to put fault necessarily. It is like we live in a patriarchal society, and if you are male or if you are anywhere leaning on the masculine end of the spectrum, you are awarded more privilege and more position than anyone that leans on the feminine end of the spectrum. And like there's so many quote unquote woke Black men that feel like they're advocating for Black liberation, but yet they imagine that it has to be in this way where, oh no, feminism is a distraction and the queer people are trying to co-opt our liberation. A bunch of crap, for lack of a better word. And as a result, we think we're going towards Black liberation following these people, but we're going towards Black-owned oppression, right? If everybody ain't free, then ain't nobody free. You dig what I'm saying? And it's just like, we need to figure out how to, like Black Lives Matter, Alicia, Opal, and Patrice, these are Black women. If I'm not mistaken, they identify on the queer spectrums, things that I think should be spoken about and named much more consistently, because Black men feel like it ain't about that, when literally the people who made this pop are the very people who you acting like don't exist, or you acting like their value is less relevant because you benefit. Who wants to give up privilege? Nobody wants to lessen their advantages in the world. And especially when you've been oppressed and you feel as though there are very real systems above you, feel like, well, ain't no way I can be privileged. What privilege do a Black man get? Says every woke hotep ass nigga. And the reality of the matter is that there's a lot of investigation and dismantling we have to do within our community in order to better push things forward. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a classic tactic for centuries to pit people who are marginalized and disenfranchised against one another, because it takes your eyes off, the greater adversary, which is the systemic oppression. We saw that, and when you see often too, when people start to actually hone in on, coalescing those unions, that's when they are become the most dangerous. A great film was just released last week, Judas and the Black Messiah, and it showed very clearly Fred Hampton uniting different factions of people. Dr. King, same thing, when he shifted from race to capitalism is when he was taken out. Malcolm X, same thing. And so, I think that the movement should be inclusive of all factions. And, I really relate to what Jules has said. It can't just be a digital, activism. It's got to be in real life.
I love it. So just to build on that, if you think about having a movement that is inclusive, that doesn't replicate the same issues of patriarchy, homophobia, all the isms that are prevalent in our society, how do you give everyone their ability to speak about their unique challenges based on the intersectionality that are part of their lives, their unique struggles? How do we do it all?
We don't. We do not. We are human beings. Nobody is going to do it all. I think that's like an unreachable goal. Mickey Kendall in Hood Feminism, like there's a point where she's talking about how like we can work in collaboration, but we should stop thinking of collaboration being like a forever thing. That at some points our identities are going to intersect, and our what our goals are going to intersect, and that other times they might be a little bit more disparate, and so we will have to break off and focus individually, but that doesn't mean that we become enemies of each other. And so I think because we try to have like these really highbrow conversations, and then it makes things overwhelming, and then people don't want to deal with it at all. I don't believe that I'm going to ever convince a Black man to disinvest from patriarchy if I'm having like this, like we got to do it for everybody, and I live in the hood, I'm not gonna get the people across the street to even be like, let's abolish the police, if I'm talking about that they have to do all, we have to do land, we have to do all these other things. I need to be meeting people locally where they are, and because I'm one person, I cannot meet everybody, and one organization isn't supposed to be the catch-all organization. And when I think of like Black Lives Matter, the organization, I'm like, there have been like poor Black women and queer folk on the ground doing this work for forever. And I think one organization got to capitalize and had better organizational and, visibility than the rest of the folks. When you think about turning Georgia blue, like, yeah, Stacey Abrams, but like how many other organizations have been in Georgia for the past 2 decades, really fighting to get people invested in electoral politics? And so there's never a point where I'm going to do all things, and I'm going to absolutely mess up. And so I'd rather think about, again, like, what is a framework that I'm putting to really invest in reparative and restorative justice within my own realm? And how can I just continue to invest in the integrity of my work?
Yeah, I think it's like, we see in politics often, like the simpler and more singular the message, the easier it is to get things done. So I think we have to align on a couple of common themes that we want to push, and unify and work toward those things. And then once we accomplish those things, we can start to broaden the scope. And like Jules has said, coalitions might happen, at one point, and then you break off and, you form your own thing, and, that's fine. But I think for us to get any change, we have to simplify and unify around those, small set of points we want to push.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
saying we can be
Julie said it all.
complicated. No, be
Yeah.
complicated. Just be focused on your complications.
Right, that's it, yeah.
Yeah, Julie said it all. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. So, as as the Black Lives Matter movement came to life, it really was designed to affirm the lives of all Black people, irrespective of being queer, being trans, being disabled, undocumented, whether you were formerly incarcerated, anywhere across the gender spectrum, all of these things, with our Blackness being at the center of it. How does this movement show up in our industries, and how people are covering this movement and what's happening? And Charity, you spoke a little bit about it, like when you initially were watching the news and how the news was portraying what was happening and the spirit behind this movement. How did you feel about that, and how do we shift that in ways that are positive?
So which question are you asking specifically? Because I heard two in there. I'm trying to get the question.
So how does this show up or should show up in the media? So one.
Okay.
So how is it now? How should it be? And how do we get it to where it should be? So yeah, two questions in one.
Yeah. How does it show up in the media now? I ain't watched the news since like 2008, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, I ain't watched the news since 2008. And it's trash because social media damn near is the new news, right? Because Elon Musk said a quote on his Clubhouse interview, and it was a joke, but it was the most profound joke. The joke was, he who controls the memes controls the universe. And it was like he was playing, but like that's really the truth, right? Like, people, if you can make one concept, whatever it is, go viral, right? Coney 2012, right? You could shift the entire way that people view a thing. And so we definitely have to be mindful of the fact that even social media, which is now this decentralized variation of news, is often kind of centralized based on the zeitgeist of whatever the current meme is, right? And whoever can swing that narrative, whoever had the most influence and most followers that said the post that went the most viral is now what actually happened. And oftentimes that is separate from reality, just like the news. And so, yeah, first of all, there has to be just a healthy level of skepticism for the things that we hear, and then what we can do to make it better, disinvest in the concept that media is here to like inform us. You know what I'm saying? It's propaganda. Like, is media here to like make you better? Like, do they profit off telling all the good things that happen every day, or do they literally profit off as many bad things as possible? Because humans from a psychological level are entranced by negativity, So I would say disinvestment from the concept of media being here to serve your information and do your own studying and your own research on your own accord.
So speaking from the media perspective, what I've seen is that it is a news cycle. even though, Joseph said this earlier, even though the same kind of atrocities are happening again and again, there are moments when people decide to, shine a spotlight on it, and other times it's just ignored. And often I think it's just dependent on what else is happening in the news cycle at that time. So I think as journalists who have a stake in it, one of the keys for us is to keep it in the spotlight throughout, and not letting it die. I've inspired to cover topics that are important to me on my platform on a weekly basis, regardless of where it is in the news cycle, just because I think it's something that we can actually keep top of mind for our audience, and so I think that's an important thing for those who are actually in the media.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I focus a lot on accessibility and misinformation. I actually think there's disinformation. I think there's a very pointed campaign of disinformation at the Black community. I don't think there's a singular solution to how do we counter the prevalence of misinformation. And as Charity was saying, yeah, social media has become a news source for a lot of people. There's like a Pew research study that was out that I think for Black Americans, it was like Black Americans and Latinx Americans were the most likely to get their news from social media.
Mm.
And so yeah, one is how do we, and this is what I try to focus on, like how do we also educate an audience? It's really cool, like it's really easy. Is it cool? It's easy though, right? Like I'm a Black feminist. It's real easy to get on here and y'all niggas ain't shit and hotep niggas, yada yada yada. But like I also have to understand why Black men even feed into some of the messaging that I find to be very violent. And if I ever want to counter it, does it behoove me to come at them like and shame them the same way that I'm saying I'm trying to, like, I've been living through a stigmatizing shame as a Black woman? Does it behoove me to then place that same sort of shame on them, and understanding that they're just, not only are they seeking power and domination, but they're seeking comfort? And if I'm not meeting people where they're at, am I really changing? I could get on Instagram all day long and yell about niggas. And I could have a huge following doing that. I don't think there's any benefit to that. What education am I really providing? And so I do think media at large, and that includes influencers, that includes corporations and the sponsorships and the way money funnels, that includes, word to the Elon Musk, and Elon Musk is a capitalist, right? He's right. It's like, how does capitalism function? The same way, who holds the means of production, right? And who's the mode of production? So like, it's like who really runs the world? Like Mark Zuckerberg, right? So I also think the people that own Google and the people that own Facebook and Twitter have a high level of responsibility, both in what content do they allow to aggregate, and also how are we all collectively educating consumers on how to become, how to actually be able to understand where their media is coming from. Because we can't just say, oh, only listen to this. People are going to go to different outlets, but how do they understand how to be discerning consumers?
I wanted to tap in. I know we already went through our answer now, but Julesy just brought up a great point. Like, when she said, like, just you could just shit on every hotep nigga you see, right? But then there's this interesting thing of like you said, everybody just wants to be comfortable. Everybody just wants, and sometimes people are beneficial even with their toxicity. And it's just like, how do we reconcile that? Nipsey Hussle, right? An extremely great human being. Oh, I'm sorry. Can y'all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes, I got it. But yeah, Nipsey Hussle, a great human being, did amazing things for our culture. People are blowing up. Yeah, they are blowing my phone up. But he also exuded a bunch of toxic patriarchal bull, right? It's clear. Like a lot of his music was very harmful to women, a lot of garbage. And yet simultaneously, he was also very beneficial to the Black community. And so within our community, sometimes it's difficult to reconcile how do we balance these things in and out. And so I thought that was a great point. So yeah, I just wanted to just
and I said men, but like, I live on YouTube, and there's a very like harmful movement that's centered around Black womanhood coming out of the YouTube space. So it's like, patriarchy has no gender. We all have the ability to be toxic people and to, again, replicate the same harm we're trying to dismantle.
So let's continue on this line of conversation and talk a little bit more about the role of our industry, the advertising, publishing, media, entertainment. As people who work in this space, how does our work play a role in our advocacy? How do we amplify the things in the Black Lives Matter movement and other movements that are important to us that help elevate and support people of color and Black folks?
I mean, I touched on this earlier. I think it's our responsibility to really stump for the things that are important to us. And for me, sometimes that actually means going against your core audience's belief sets at times. When gay marriage was legalized, I think it was 2015. The headline that I ran on Facebook was, now that gay marriage is legal, when will hip hop stop being so homophobic? And I knew that wasn't going to be particularly attractive to my audience, but it was something that needed to be addressed, because as much as I love hip hop culture, I understand that homophobia is deeply embedded in it, and unless people like us are the ones to speak out against it, it's never going to be rooted out. And so I think it's the exact same thing with Black Lives Matter. And like I said, it's up to us to keep the narrative alive when the mainstream news cycle decides to abandon it.
Yeah, I run a book club under Smart Brown Girl. We focus on making reading accessible. So I'm always referencing the books that I've read, but I also realize that reading is not accessible. Both, from just, we're in a pandemic, people are highly stressed, people have kids, jobs, diverse knowledge and language bases. So we all have a different entry point. And a lot of times, there's a thing about the woke-tivists on Twitter, or even the Black intellectual on Twitter. And these people will be tweeting about Fred Moten, and I was like, have you ever I've read Fred Moten, and it's one of the most difficult. His syntax is very complicated, and it's really not, his writing is not something that you can read outside of the classroom. So when we get on any social media platform and we want to encourage people to dismantle whatever ism or what patriarchy or whatever institution that we see as harmful to the livelihoods of Black people, are we explaining how we got to these theories, and are we explaining this in an accessible manner? So in the book club, we take these social theory academic texts along with fiction. So this month, we're reading Beloved by Toni Morrison and Hortense Spiller's essay, which is a complicated essay, but we've done a lot to curate discussions and events to really make these readings more accessible. So our audience and our community has a chance to understand some of the social theories that are really prevalent in the discourse, but haven't really been netted out to make it accessible to a broader audience.
Yeah, this is my favorite conversation in all of quote unquote activism. This is my absolute favorite conversation. So there's a language called French and there's a language called Italian. If you are in France and you go really, really close to the Italian border, they'll be speaking something like in between French and Italian, some dialect of the two of those. That's because there's no real such thing as the right way to speak. The right way to speak is what is accessible to the person that you're speaking to, right? Albert Einstein has a quote, and he says, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. And so we got this issue specifically in the Black community, but in everywhere, because it's language is inherently oppressive. It is inherently elitist. The idea of a correct, objective way to speak or do some shit is just inherently to hoard knowledge and say, if you are on the low class and you don't got the schoolwork, you don't get this shit, you can't understand it, sorry for you. That's literally how language was constructed. That's the reason why there are big words that means the same thing as a little word, literally just for the jargon purposes of leaving people out of it. You dig what I'm saying? So I go out of my way in my media to be as normal and regular and talk like I'm from Gary, Indiana. I talk like I'm from Gary, Indiana. Now, sometimes I can go into this extreme educational discourse voice and all of that shit. But especially when I'm around white people, I actually go out of my way to be as Black as possible so that they don't think there's this separation between the good Negro and the bad Negro, right? Reasons why this whole thing, to circle out full circle back to Black Lives Matter, right? Trayvon had on a hoodie. You dig what I'm saying? Because, and again, this is not blaming us as a community, but I would like to shine light on the fact that even within our own communities, we act like if somebody looks like this, then they're more likely to be less successful. You need to put on a suit. You need to cut your hair this specific way so that you are assimilating to this homogenous white culture. When really, I'm really about being off that completely. It's all about accessibility. It's all about inclusion, which means take all the BS out, take all of the elitist jargon and highbrow intellectual, intelligentsia, all of that go away. Let's make it accessible. That is what everything is about, is accessibility. I don't think that the oppressed people can move forward without accessibility.
Great. At the risk of ruffling some feathers, let's talk a little bit about capitalism. We live in a capitalist society. All of our businesses are supported from capitalist infrastructures and rules. From an economic perspective, to further the movement, what do we need to do, knowing that we are in a capitalist society? How can we bring resources to bear as creators in the media, entertainment, publishing industry? What role do our businesses and the financial remuneration that comes from those have to contribute to the struggle?
I want to hear Reggie.
Charity and I were talking about this earlier, and now that I know you're an Indiana dude, it makes more sense because I'm an Indiana guy myself. But in any case, I think that because we are a capitalist society, any kind of real change has to come through capitalism. When we talk about civil rights movements in the last few decades that have been successful, they have been coupled with very strong economic action. So the civil rights movement in the 60s, people talk about Dr. King and, Sick and all the different movements, but what's not talked about is and this is where the grassroots part did come in, the hundreds of thousands of people, or whatever the number it was, who walked to work every day for a year in order to not ride a bus and support the capitalist system until that bus changed its rules. That is the kind of thing that actually brings the lasting change, in my opinion, not the marches, not the protests, things like that. The protests raise awareness, and then they have to be followed up with the economic action. Similarly, people were making songs about apartheid and things like that, but it wasn't until companies actually started divesting due to financial pressure put on them by their customers that apartheid fell. I think that that needs to happen with the Black Lives Matters movement for it to have the real kind of effect that we think it can. We saw glimpses of it over the summer with FedEx and I think Nike putting pressure on people like the Washington football team to change their name. And we're seeing companies like Netflix allocate hundreds of millions of dollars toward investing in Black communities. But until we as a collective actually command change through capitalism as opposed to relying on the beneficence of others, I don't think that kind of lasting change will come.
So I understand what Reggie is saying, and I have a certain level of respect for it. I also deeply disagree, and yet I feel you, but I deeply disagree, and here's why. So my boy Nip, right behind me, right? The movie that just came out, Judas and the Black Messiah, the Black Panthers were very, very clearly anti-capitalist. I mean, as clear as it gets. The Black Panthers did not rock with capitalism. And yet, the very first song on the soundtrack of the album is Nipsey Hussle and Jay-Z. Huey Newton would throw up in his mouth. He would throw up. And it's because, and again, there's nothing wrong with Black people getting money. We do need money. I got jewelry on right now. I am a victim of this same capitalistic system, right? I like money. And also, capitalism is inherently oppressive. Even if Black people get rich, like even if we get stupid wealthy, if you, Sheila, right now, you got beautiful hair. Let's say you want to start you a hair care line made from products based on shea butter or whatever. Cool, maybe you'll get some nice, maybe you'll become a billionaire, right? You might have organics, you busting, right? But thing is, where is that shea sourced from? From Ghana. And they done basically stole it from niggas out there. You dig what I'm saying? And that plastic is coming from Brazil. And the rubber is coming from Liberia. Again, the Black movement ain't just about America. This is the African diaspora. And everywhere where wealth is created, like anything you want to look around, gold is literally harvested. And that's the thing. Capitalism is literally built upon siphoning the absolute most amount of value out of something while taking all the margins for yourself. That is how capitalism operates. It cannot operate without that. That being said, capitalism literally cannot exist without oppression. And so even if we become the rich niggas now, we're still literally, whether it directly or not, oppressing people all around the world, particularly people that look like us. So yeah, maybe Black Americans will be free, but Black Africans, Black Caribbeans, Black Brazilians, all of these people will be dealing with even more oppression as a result of our wealth. That being the case, and I know you unmuted, Reggie, but that being the case, I feel like it is necessary for us to figure out how to operate outside of capitalism. And then to Reggie's point, because I do want to give some value to it. Money makes things move. If you have infrastructure, right, as Josie was talking about, Black Lives Matter, they got stupid levels of donations, which absolutely help the movement, right? I can't deny that money helps push things forward, and also taking your money away from these organizations, i.e. the FedEx things, helps to push and bring about change more. All I'm saying is that Black capitalism will not liberate us. It cannot, because it is capitalism, which is inherently oppressive.
Yeah, I think even more so on like a local level though, before we like capitalism. So there's when we get into like economic theory, there's different types of capitalism. And the capitalism particular to America is built on chattel slavery. It's built on imperialism. And so Black folks as a community are never going to be wealthy under the system of capitalism as we know it in America. But then we start, when we tell people like that capitalism is harmful to Black folks, then there are the ideas, well, what's the other side of it? And I don't think, we have this idea of socialism or communism, they're boogeyman terms, and we don't get that there's like even like anarchy, there's different types of anarchy, where are the angles, there's different types of socialism. And I think even if part of dismantling capitalism is that we do need to change the political structure of the United States. And it's like, I think we believe in the group economics or the power of the Black dollar, but like we've been in this country for hundreds of years. And yeah, we've only had, a good amount of civil rights for maybe the past 50 or so years. But even when Black communities, create wealth, what happens? Like Tulsa, they get burned down, or like LA, or New Orleans, they get a highway built through their neighborhood. For like Black women, Black women were domestic workers up until the 70s. And when FDR passed the Social Security Act of 1934, various states changed policy to ensure that Black women and Black folks at large could not get what we essentially know as modern day welfare, right? And then what we also get on the other side of this, and word to Dr. Collins, is the domains of power are so well built into our social institutions that whatever way we maneuver, these hierarchies are constantly replicated, right? So the Social Security Act of 34, when we think of welfare, we think of child support, we think of food stamps, and we might kind of think of like, we think of Medicare and like stipends, and we might kind of think of unemployment, but we don't realize that pensions are a part of welfare. But pensions were not allowed for most jobs that Black folks had until the 80s. So pensions were always a thing the white union guys got. And, Black newspapers participated in creating this stereotype of the Black woman on welfare, of the single Black mother who is taking from the system. Never mind that like that sort of money and that policy all comes from the same bill. But we don't look at the things that the white people have access to as bad, but the things that Black folks have access to are the things that become negatively stigmatized, and we as a community participate in that stigmatization. So even before what is capitalism? Man, we could just like literally change public policy, right? We should have universal health care. We should have universal kindergarten, universal daycare. We should have an ERA, an equal rights amendment. We should, like, there's all these ways to, divest from capitalism. We should change the gig economy. We should have a higher minimum wage. We might not ever get to eradicating capitalism as a whole. And I think that takes a critical mass of education on what system do we even go to. It's like, I hear Elizabeth Warren talk about she's a capitalist to the bone. And I actually think a lot of her policy is democratic socialist, as is Bernie Sanders. But it's like, to say that you're not capitalist is so like we live in a propaganda state. So I can say one thing, we're going to get a soundbite pulled from it, and it'll end up on Fox News, it'll end up on OAN or Washington Examiner, and half this country is going to hear it completely different than the way I talked about it. So we can't even talk about systems outside of capitalism because there's a whole media infrastructure that's going to turn that on its head and use it against you. And part of the issue is that we need a policy change. We need a government infrastructure change that actually, we talk about capitalism, and I'm thinking like, if the power goes out, why does it go out for an hour in the white neighborhood and 3 days in the black neighborhood? And that's a change that we can absolutely affect and make happen in a much quicker sense than we're ever going to get towards dismantling capitalism. That doesn't mean I'm not still working towards dismantling capitalism. And again, I'm always talking about things coming back to what do I do in my day-to-day life? I don't keep interns, right? So I started as a YouTuber, I started a book club, and we have a whole team behind it. And I had a bunch of women come and say, I will work for you for free. I pay everybody. And the more money I make, the more everybody gets paid. Right. And I'm not going to, and also it's hard. It's hard because we all grew up under this capitalist system, and we all have to acknowledge that we like being comfortable and we like having nice things. Mm-hmm. But I also think about, when a lot of Black folks will undervalue their rates. So like I had a shirt design and the guy was like, I'll charge you $75. And I'm like, no, I'll pay you $500. Like, I'm going to consistently make sure that also am I paying people equitable rates within the means that I have? Am I being equitable to the community that I, again, have access to?
Yeah.
So I think we get caught up in labels. And, just to clarify for me, it's not really about capitalism. I'll flip it to a different label. It's about economic empowerment. And I think if you look at
I just want to tie, and Reggie, not to interrupt you, just tying it back to, I think when I said capitalism, it took us off on a tangent to, talking about, and these issues are all interconnected, but really thinking about how do we support the movements that are important to us, and particularly, with wanting to see, to support Black Lives Matter, and what we can bring to the table being part of the advertising, media, and entertainment industry. Those are inherently capitalist. So I just wanted to have that as recognize that and say, but given that we recognize that, how do we use those tools to our advantage? And how do we continue to impact change in our industry? Because we could definitely debate about all the political things that we want to change or not change and improve or edit. How about that? But okay, so let me get us back to Black Lives Matter. One thing I wanted to really talk about, because I think that you guys would be experts at your perspective on this, I think a lot of people would be interested in, is how do brands join this conversation around Black Lives Matter, or do they join this conversation around Black Lives Matter? Who's done a good job? What is there space for them? How do they play a role in this movement?
Hire Black staff. Are there Black women in your C-suite? You know what I mean? Like, who?
C-suite staff. Let's be
what's the
specific.
company looking like? What's your, what's the inside? I think before a brand, you know what I mean? And I work on the side where I benefit from the brands being more attuned to what they're doing outwardly. But what are you doing inwardly? Are you hiring Black women, Black queer folk, Black trans folks? Are you paying people correctly? Are you creating a compassionate work environment? Are you exploiting anybody on your staff? And then when, so actually doing things and not just participating in a hashtag. And then on the outward side, I don't think there's anything wrong with any brand, well, most brands participating in, whatever hashtag, but are you doing it with integrity? And again, if your internal is handled right, then the outward approach will be handled right, because you'll have teams and peoples and consultants who can help guide you in the right way.
Yeah, man, like a lot of it is just it's just cap, bro. Like after after George Floyd died, I about saw BLM in every white person window I ever met. And I know you don't care about Black Lives, but the thing is, BLM, that's your escape catch. You like, hey yo, BLM, bro, BLM, like, yo, I'm with it. Like, I'm not racist. You dig what I'm saying? And that's goofy because it's not actual change. It's performative justice, right? And so there's that. So I think that's goofy. Stop, sit that there. The other aspect of the conversation is like, I did a tweet yesterday. I did a little Twitter thread about white brands. The fact that every brand out right now sound like a Black woman is running a Twitter. I hate that. Cause it's literally this like, it's the 50% discount for me. You like, please don't, because this is what we do. We co-opt Black culture. Black coolness runs the world, right? So white people literally siphon the coolness out of Black people and use it to sell back to Black people and to everybody in the world, because everybody wants to be hip hop. Ebonics is the language of Twitter, right? Hip hop is the pop of the world. And the fact that y'all want to use our culture to get money and to get y'all platform and to get big, and yet don't hire none of us, yet none of the people in there look like us. Now affirmative action, you're like, wait, no, affirmative action is racist, says every white person. But the thing is, no, your biases naturally make you want to hire the white man. And affirmative action is a fail-safe for your natural racist bias that everybody, even other Black people, have. That's why we say, oh, that's why I don't do business with Black people. One Black business could do one wrong thing, and we go to a white brand specifically because we have been trained to believe that Black people are lazy or unorganized or all of these things. And so we need these fail safes from a systemic level and from a policy level to counteract that inherent bias that we have towards white men. And so, yeah, to brands, stop talking like Black people if you don't hire Black people. You know what I'm saying? That's just huge. And don't make it performative. Actually create fail safes for your inherent racism that definitely exists, because it even exists within us Black people. So it definitely exists within white capitalism.
Yeah, and I think it's supporting Black businesses. I think businesses like yours, Sheila. I mean, it's really easy to go to a Google or a Facebook and spend on an algorithmic, platform, but you obviously know the audience better, can reach them in a more targeted, nuanced way, can help shape creative that will actually be appealing to people. I think things like that, like working with actual Black businesses, is something that is critical. To echo the point, there's a new fund called the Black Dollar Index, not a fund, it's a tool by a woman named Kelly Roselle, which rates companies based on how they perform with Black people. How many people are at the C-suite? How many are on the board? How many complaints have there been? How many dollars have you spent in the Black community? And I think it's a really powerful thing. But getting involved with initiatives like that.
And one final question. We're at time, but I want to definitely get this one in because I think it's so important. So as we focus on the struggle and Black liberation and moving forward, the Black Lives Matter movement, we talked about where is the space for brands and where is the space for allyship in general. So if you aren't Black, what role is there for you in this movement? How do we think about creating solidarity across, an intersectional group of people?
I think everybody who's down for the cause and down to help is an ally. And I embrace and welcome anyone who wants to help.
Liberation isn't comfortable. And so I think what trips people up across the board is not like feeling uncomfortable, and if you're a white person and you're used to being the majority, or being, every time you walk into the room, to being the right one in every room you enter into, being an ally in this space towards Black liberation or any community's liberation, you're going to have to get good with being uncomfortable. And it might not, part of growth is being uncomfortable. Growth is not a comfortable process. And so any of us that are constantly reaching for comfort and not wanting to deal with the complications of investing in labor are never really going to be able to participate in the fight towards liberation, whether it is as a member of that community or as an ally.
One of my favorite quotes of all time is Cornel West. And he says, the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. The condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. If you are white or you are an ally, and I would even consider myself an ally in a lot of ways because I am a male and I have a certain level of privilege that Black women, Black queer, Black trans people do not have access to. So I am an ally for that movement, even within this Black community. And I think that's necessary because if I do not allow their suffering to speak, and I take the space and I make my voice the biggest in the room, then all of it does, no matter how good-willed I may be, it just replicates that same power structure that we're going to get. So if you are white and you're trying to help in Black Lives Matter, you got to shut up. You got to like walk in here and say, I'm gonna be quiet this whole time and just shut up unless asked to speak. And that's important because we have a society and again, our own personal biases as a result of living within this society that teeters towards whiteness, that teeters towards maleness. So if you are a white person in a room with a bunch of Black people, when you talk, people just gonna listen, even the Black people, because we've been taught to kind of just like defer to you, you know? And so if you are going to be an ally, you have to realize that you cannot, and I mean cannot, hold the charge for the movement of dismantling racism, dismantling patriarchy. The only people that can hold the responsibility and be the people that actually build the new world are the most oppressed. Because if you, as a quote unquote ally, are trying to build it yourself, then you're still building a world for them, which is still oppression. Be quiet and listen.
Much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I literally could have just sat here for hours listening to all of you school me. So I hope that that everyone out there listening in has gotten at least half as much out of this as I have. We have folks giving folks shout outs here in the chat. So jump in the chat, say hi to people. Thank you all for tuning in to episode 5 of Mirror Moments, the evolution of the Black Lives Matter movement. Thank you, Julesy. Thank you, Reggie. Thank you, Charity. This has been a lively and informative conversation. And I look forward to the next conversation with you all. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you for supporting Mirror Digital.